My name is Nora Calloway. I am 29 years old. I grew up in Millhaven, Louisiana, a town small enough that everybody knows which family you belong to, and large enough that they know everything that family has ever done. The Calloways were considered solid people, church-going, hard-working, the kind of family that showed up to neighborhood events and brought enough food to feed twice as many people as were actually coming. I am the second of 4 children. My brother Daniel is the oldest, 33 now, works in construction management. My sister Priya is 27. Always been my mother's favorite in that specific way mothers have favorites without ever saying it out loud. My youngest brother Caleb just turned 24 and has always been everyone's baby. Forgiven for everything, held accountable for nothing. Then there's me, Nora, the second child, the reliable one. The one who stayed in Millhaven while Daniel moved to Baton Rouge, while Priya went to Shreveport for school and stayed there. I stayed. Not because I had no options. I had options. I stayed because my parents asked me to. And at 22, I believed that staying for the people who loved you was something worth doing. My father, Raymond, ran a hardware store on Clement Street that his own father had built in 1971. My mother, Denise, worked part-time at the parish clerk's office and spent the other half of her time running the unofficial social operations of the Calloway household, organizing holiday gatherings, maintaining relationships with extended family, ensuring that the image the Calloways projected to Millhaven was always exactly what she wanted it to be. The image was important to my mother. More important, I would come to understand, than most things she claimed were important. I need to tell you about the house before I tell you anything else. Because the house is the center of everything that happened, and if you don't understand what the house meant to this family, the rest of the story won't make the kind of sense it needs to make. The Calloway house was built in 1962 on 2 acres of land on the edge of town, backing up against a bayou that flooded every few years and dried up in the summers into something barely deserving the name water. 3 bedrooms, a wide porch, a kitchen my grandmother had designed herself, and a storage shed in the back that my grandfather had used as a workshop and that my father had converted into an office for the hardware store's paperwork. The house had been in the family for 60 years when my grandfather passed and left it to my father. Not to my father and his 2 brothers equally. To my father alone. With a letter that my grandfather had written and left with the estate attorney explaining that Raymond was the one who had stayed close, who had helped with the store, who had earned it. My father's brothers contested it. There was a legal dispute that lasted almost 2 years and cost the family relationships that never fully recovered. My father won. The house was his. For the next 15 years, the house was the gravitational center of everything. Holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinners. When Daniel got married, the reception was in the backyard. When Priya graduated college, the celebration dinner was in that kitchen. When Caleb wrecked his first car at 19, he moved back into his old bedroom for 8 months without anyone suggesting he should leave. I'm telling you all of this because I want you to understand that the house wasn't just property. It was the whole story of who this family believed itself to be. And the reason I ended up with the insurance policy in my name is because of a Tuesday afternoon in April, 2 years before the evacuation, when my father had a mild stroke. Nothing catastrophic. He recovered fully. But for about 3 weeks, while he was in the hospital, and then in rehabilitation, someone needed to handle the house paperwork. The insurance renewal had come due. The premium needed to be paid. My mother was overwhelmed and asked me to handle it. I handled it. I called the insurance company, renewed the policy, paid the premium with the emergency account my father had given me access to. Standard homeowners insurance, flood insurance on top of that. Because Louisiana, because Bayou, because you'd be a fool not to. The insurance company representative asked me whose name the policy should be in. I said my own, because my father was in the hospital and couldn't sign anything and I was the one handling the account. She processed it. I filed the documents in the household folder in my father's office. The brown accordion folder labeled House on the tab in my father's handwriting. My father came home. Life resumed. Nobody ever asked about the insurance. Nobody ever changed the name on the policy back. 2 years passed. Then Hurricane Ida's younger and meaner cousin came for Millhaven on a Wednesday night in September. The forecast had been building for 4 days. We all watched it. Millhaven had been through storms before. We were the kind of community that had evacuation routes memorized the way other people memorize their commute. But this one was different. The meteorologists were using words like catastrophic and life-threatening and unsurvivable storm surge, and those words have a specific weight when you live 40 minutes from the Gulf. By Sunday, the mandatory evacuation order had been issued for our parish. By Monday morning, the highways north were already moving at a crawl. I was living in a rental house about 12 minutes from my parents at this point. I'd been there for 3 years, paying rent to a landlord who owned half the street and who I knew would not be returning my calls during an active hurricane evacuation. My rental house was in a flood zone. My parents' house was on slightly higher ground, but not by enough. On Monday afternoon, I called my mother, asked about the plan. "We're leaving Tuesday morning," she said. "Early. Your father wants to be on the road before 7. Should I come to the house tonight?" I asked. "So we can all leave together?" A pause. "You know how much space the car takes with all the documents and the valuables, Nora." I waited. I thought she was going to say something else. She didn't. "Okay," I said. "I'll meet you there Tuesday morning." "We're leaving at 6, she said. "Don't be late." Monday night, I packed what I could fit into my car. Important documents, some clothes, my laptop, my grandmother's jewelry box that I'd been keeping for her since she moved into assisted living. I drove to my parents' house at 5:45 Tuesday morning, earlier than she'd asked, because I'm the kind of person who shows up early. The driveway was empty. I sat there for a moment in my car, engine running, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn dark. The house was locked, no lights on inside. I tried the door. They'd given me a key years ago and never asked for it back. The house was empty, and already had that particular quality of emptiness that tells you it wasn't just recently left. It was prepared to be left. Furniture pushed back from walls. Valuables gone from surfaces. Photographs taken from the hallway. I called my mother. It went to voicemail. I called my father. Voicemail. I called Daniel. His phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I stood in the driveway of my family's house in the dark while a Category 4 equivalent storm was 14 hours from landfall, and I called each member of my family once. My mother, my father, Daniel, Priya, Caleb, 5 calls, 5 voicemails. I made a decision in that driveway. I got back in my car, and I drove north. Not because I stopped caring about what had just happened, but because standing in a hurricane evacuation zone processing family abandonment is a fast way to die, and I intended to survive this night. I drove 8 hours to my college roommate Maya's apartment in Memphis, and I didn't stop once. Maya made me tea. I didn't drink and asked me questions I couldn't fully answer because I was still in that strange suspended state that comes when something happens that is too large for your mind to fully accept. "They left without me," I said. That was the whole sentence. That was the whole fact. They left without me. Maya said several things. Practical things. Maybe there was a miscommunication. Maybe they thought you were meeting them somewhere. Maybe their phones died. I had called once. That was deliberate. 1 call each. Because I knew, somewhere underneath the shock, that if they had wanted to reach me, if they had looked in the driveway and seen my car missing and thought, "Where is Nora?" They had phones. They had my number. They had known me for 29 years. They didn't call. Not that night. Not during the storm. Not when the news was showing footage of Millhaven with water in the streets and trees across rooftops. I watched the coverage from Maya's couch with a blanket around my shoulders and my phone face up on the cushion beside me, screen on, waiting. The storm made landfall at 2 a.m. By 4, Millhaven was underwater. By 6, I had a text from my mother. One sentence. "Did you get out okay?" Not a question mark. A period. Like she already knew the answer. Like she was completing an administrative task rather than checking on a daughter she had not spoken to in over 24 hours. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I typed back, "Yes." That was all. One word. She didn't reply. I want to be very clear about something. In that moment, I was not making a plan. I was not calculating a strategy. I was not thinking about insurance policies or legal standing or any of the things that would become relevant later. I was just a person who had been left behind by her family during a natural disaster, sitting in a borrowed apartment in Memphis watching floodwater fill the streets of the town she grew up in. The plan came later. The plan came because of what happened next. The storm passed. The water receded. The damage assessment began. Millhaven had taken a serious hit. Large sections of the town flooded. Power was out for most neighborhoods for 11 days. The hardware store on Clement Street had 3 feet of water through the ground floor. The family house had flood damage to the foundation and the back rooms, and a section of the roof had been compromised by a fallen pine tree from the property line. I know all of this because I read the damage reports. I looked them up online. I subscribed to the local newspaper's digital edition. I followed the Millhaven community Facebook page, where neighbors were posting photos and damage updates. Not because my family told me any of it. My mother called me for the first time, actually. Called, not texted, 11 days after the storm. I was back in Millhaven by then. I had returned 4 days after the storm passed because my rental house, as I'd feared, had taken significant damage, and I needed to document it for my renter's insurance claim. She called while I was standing in my gutted rental kitchen, taking photographs of the waterlogged cabinets for the insurance adjuster. "Nora," she said when I picked up. "Thank God. I've been so worried." She had not called in 11 days. I said nothing to that. Just waited. "The house," she said. "The damage is bad. The insurance company needs to be contacted. Your father is handling the store and I'm dealing with the contractor assessments, and we need someone to call the insurance company and file the claim for the house." "I can do that," I said. There was a relief in her voice that told me she had never seriously considered that I might say no. "You're such a good girl, Nora," she said. "We knew we could count on you." I thought about the driveway, the empty driveway. 5 calls, 5 voicemails, the text with no question mark. "I'll take care of it," I said. And I did. I called the insurance company that afternoon. Pulled up the policy number from the documents I'd filed 2 years ago, and it was in that conversation with the insurance representative that I confirmed, in official terms, what I had technically known, but never fully thought through. The policyholder was Nora Jean Calloway, me. The claim, when it was filed, would require the policyholder's authorization at every stage. The settlement payment, when it was issued, would be made out to the policyholder. The house my family had evacuated without me. The house whose insurance policy they had never once thought to check in 2 years. The payout that would come from the storm damage, estimated by the adjuster at between $80,000 and $120,000, depending on the final assessment, would be issued to me. I hung up the phone and sat down on the floor of my water-damaged rental kitchen for about 10 minutes. Then I called my lawyer. Her name was Cécile Marchand. I had used her 2 years earlier when my landlord had tried to withhold my previous security deposit illegally. She had recovered it in full plus fees within 3 weeks. She was precise, fast, and had the specific quality of absolute calm that the best lawyers have, the kind that makes you feel like whatever chaos is happening around you is already being managed. I told her everything. The insurance policy in my name, the evacuation, the 11 days of silence, the call asking me to file the claim. I told her about my father's stroke 2 years ago and how the policy had ended up in my name. I I told her the adjuster's estimate. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. First, do you have documentation that the policy is legitimately in your name? Original paperwork, payment records? Yes, I said. It's all in my father's household files. I filed it there myself. Second, what do you want the outcome to be? I sat with that question for a moment. I want them to understand what they did, I said. I want there to be a consequence that they cannot talk their way out of or explain away or reframe as a misunderstanding. Cecile was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The policy is legally yours. The claim settlement will be yours. You are under no legal obligation to redirect those funds to your parents. The house is their property, but the insurance payout is a separate contractual matter between you and the insurance company." She paused. "What I would suggest," she said, "is that you do nothing precipitous. File the claim. Let the assessment process run. See what the settlement figure looks like. And don't tell your family about the policy name until you have decided what you want to do with that information." "I can do that," I said. The same words I had said to my mother. This time I meant something completely different by them. Here is what the next 3 months looked like from the outside. I was helpful. I was available. I was, by every external measure, exactly the Nora my family had always counted on. I coordinated with the insurance adjuster. I filed the damage documentation. I responded to the insurance company's requests for additional information and photographs and contractor estimates. My family treated this as expected, not as a kindness, not as something that warranted specific acknowledgement or gratitude. It was simply Nora doing what Nora does, being useful, being reliable, being the one they could count on without having to think about whether she was okay. Nobody asked if I was okay. In the 3 months following the storm, not one member of my family, not my mother, not my father, not Daniel, not Priya, not Caleb, asked me a direct question about my experience of the evacuation. Not how I had gotten out, not where I had stayed, not what had happened to my rental house, not how I was managing. I moved into Maya's cousin's spare room in a neighborhood 20 minutes from Millhaven while my rental was being repaired. My parents knew this because I had mentioned it once. They did not offer space in a hotel they were staying in with Daniel and his wife during the repairs. They did not offer a room at Priya's apartment in Shreveport. These things did not apparently occur to them. What occurred to them, in those 3 months, was the insurance claim. My mother asked about it at least once a week. Every phone call circled back to it eventually. "When do you think they'll finish the assessment? Has the adjuster responded to the last round of documentation? What's the timeline looking like?" The claim was progressing exactly as Cecile and I had planned. The final assessment came in at $114,000. Catastrophic damage to the foundation, significant roof damage, full replacement of the rear addition. The insurance company issued the settlement determination in week 11. Cecile called me the morning the determination arrived. "It's yours," she said. "Full settlement, $114,000. The check will be issued in your name. The process for receiving it will require your signature and your banking information. Your family's names appear nowhere in the settlement documentation." I asked her what happened next. She said, "That's entirely up to you." That afternoon, I called my mother and told her the settlement had been determined. "Oh, thank God," she said. "How much?" "I'll explain everything when I see you," I said. "Can we have dinner? All of us? The whole family?" "Of course," she said immediately. "This is good news. We should celebrate." I scheduled dinner for the following Saturday. The family house was still being repaired, so my mother booked a private room at Maison Rouge, the nicest restaurant in Millhaven, the kind of place the Callaways went when they wanted everyone in town to see them celebrating. I thought that was fitting. I want to tell you about the 4 days between that phone call and the dinner, because they matter. I did not spend those 4 days plotting revenge in the way people imagine when they hear a story like this. I was not sitting in a dark room rubbing my hands together. I was doing something much quieter and much harder. I was deciding who I wanted to be when this was over. Because here is the thing about having legitimate power over people who have never once considered that you might have any. The power itself isn't the point. What you do with it is the point. And what you do with it tells you, and them, something permanent about your character. I talked to Maya every night that week. Maya, who had driven me to Memphis when I called, who had not once in 11 days treated my presence in her apartment as an inconvenience, who had asked me every single day how I was doing and meant it. I told her what I was planning. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is this going to make you feel better, or is it going to make you feel like them?" I thought about that for a long time. "I am not like them," I said finally. "That's actually the whole point." What I decided, what Cecile and I worked out together over 2 long phone calls that week, was a plan that was not about destruction. It was about clarity. About making something true that had always been true, but had never been said out loud in a room where everyone could hear it. The settlement was mine legally. What I chose to do with it was a separate question. And I had thought very carefully about the answer. Saturday came. Maison Rouge has a private dining room in the back with burgundy walls and low lighting and a table that seats 12. My mother had booked it for 7. When I arrived at 6:55, they were all already there. My father, Raymond, looking older than the last time I'd seen him in person, which had been before the storm. My mother, Denise, in a dress I recognized as her good dress, the one she wore when she wanted to make an impression. Daniel and his wife, Kara. Priya, who had driven down from Shreveport for the occasion. Caleb, who was on his phone when I walked in and put it away approximately 4 seconds after he noticed me. Cecile was not there. She didn't need to be. Everything was already done. My mother stood up and hugged me and said something about how wonderful this was and how relieved everyone was and how hard it had all been. The storm, the repairs, the stress. She said it in the way she always said things, as if the story of what had happened was primarily a story about her. We ordered. We ate the bread. We made the kind of small talk that families make when everyone knows. The real conversation is coming and nobody wants to be the one to start it. My father started it. "So," he said, setting down his water glass. "The insurance." What did they say? Everyone at the table oriented toward me. This was the moment. The news. The good news my mother had told them was coming. I set down my fork. I looked around the table. My father's expectant face. My mother's carefully arranged expression of patient calm. Daniel checking whether Kara was paying attention. Priya with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Caleb finally looking at me instead of through me. The settlement came in at $114,000, I said. My mother exhaled. My father closed his eyes briefly, the way people do when relief is so large it needs a moment to move through the body. "Thank God," my father said. "That will cover the foundation and the roof, and we'll have enough left to start on the store repairs." I waited until he was finished. "There's something you need to know," I said, "about the policy." My mother's expression shifted slightly. Just slightly. The way expressions shift when someone hears a tone that doesn't match the conversation they were expecting. "When you asked me to renew the insurance 2 years ago," I said, "when Dad was in the hospital, I renewed it. I paid the premium. And when the representative asked whose name to put the policy in, I gave her mine. Because Dad couldn't sign anything, and I was the one handling the account." Silence. "The policy has been in my name for 2 years, I continued. "The settlement is issued to the policyholder. The check is in my name." More silence. A different kind of silence. My mother set down her wine glass. "Well," she said carefully, "that's just an administrative thing. We can have that corrected easily. It's not an administrative thing, I said. It's a legal contract. The settlement has been determined and issued to the policyholder. That process is complete. My father was very still. Nora, he said. That's our house. I know it's your house, I said. And I know you know that. I'm wondering if you also know that the night of the evacuation, I drove to your house at 5:45 in the morning, and the driveway was empty. And I called each of you once, and nobody answered, and nobody called me back. Not that night. Not during the storm. Not for 11 days after. The table was completely quiet. I want to ask you something, I said. I want to ask it once and I want an actual answer. Not an explanation about logistics. Not something about car space or timing or miscommunication. I looked at my mother, then my father, then Daniel, then Priya, then Caleb. Did you know I was still in Millhaven when you left? No one spoke for a long time. Then my mother said, It was chaotic, Nora. You know how it was. I nodded. I know exactly how it was, I said. That's why I'm asking. My father was the first one to try to redirect the conversation. We can talk about the evacuation later, he said. Right now we need to figure out the insurance situation because the contractors. I know about the contractors, I said. I've been coordinating with the insurance adjuster for 3 months. His jaw tightened. Daniel leaned forward. Look, Nora, I get that you're upset about the evacuation. But that money belongs to the house, to the family. I looked at him. Does it? I asked. Which part of the family? The part that loaded 4 cars and drove north? Or the part that stood in the driveway in the dark and called 5 people who didn't answer? Daniel sat back. Kara, his wife, was looking at the table in the specific way people look at tables when they are present for something they did not expect and cannot leave. Priya spoke. Her voice was quieter than the others. She'd always been quieter when things got real. I thought you had a plan, she said. I thought you were leaving from your place. What plan? I said. I called Mom on Monday. She said you were all leaving Tuesday at 6 from the house. I said I would be there. She said don't be late. Priya turned to my mother. My mother's composure was still intact, but it had the quality of a wall that knows something is hitting it repeatedly. There was confusion, she said. Everything was happening so fast. I've been going over that morning for 3 months, I said. I've tried to find the version of it where the confusion was innocent, where it was just chaos and poor communication, and not something anyone would do on purpose. I want that version to be true. I've been trying to make it true. I paused, but I keep coming back to the same thing. 4 vehicles, 7 people, 11 minutes in the driveway based on the tracks in the mud. And not one person in any of those vehicles picked up a phone to call the daughter who had said she would be there. My father looked at the window. My mother looked at her plate. Caleb, who had been silent the entire time, said something I didn't expect him to say. He said, I asked where you were, in the driveway, when we were loading. I asked Mom where Nora was, and she said you were meeting us at the gas station on Route 9. Every head at the table turned to my mother. She said nothing. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I reached into my bag and put a folder on the table. Inside was a single document. That's a copy of the insurance policy, I said, and a copy of the settlement determination. Cecile Marchand's number is on the front page. She's my attorney. If anyone has legal questions, she can answer them. I stood up. I'm not keeping the money, I said. I decided that a long time ago. The money belongs to the house. But before I sign anything, before I authorize any transfer of the settlement funds, I need something from this family. What? My father said. His voice was raw in a way I hadn't heard before. I need someone in this room to say what actually happened. Not logistics, not chaos. What actually happened? I picked up my bag. I'll be at Maya's. You have Cecile's number. When you're ready to have that conversation, call me. Not to talk about money, to talk about what happened in that driveway. I walked out of Maison Rouge and into the warm Louisiana night, and I drove back to Maya's cousin's spare room, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time in the dark, without turning on the lights. Not because I was devastated, because I was finished. Something was finished. I could feel it the way you feel a long illness ending. Not celebration, just the strange, unfamiliar lightness of something heavy finally gone. My mother called the next morning at 7:42. I know the time because I was already awake, and I watched the phone ring and made a deliberate decision to answer it. She talked for about 4 minutes without stopping. About the stress of the storm. About how she had been worried sick about me. About how the family had been through so much, and how this wasn't the time to make things harder. About how I needed to understand that everything she did was for the family. I let her finish. Then I said, "Mom, did you tell Caleb that I was meeting you? At the Route 9 gas station?" A pause. "I don't remember exactly what I said that morning," she said. "It was chaos." I waited. There was a long silence. "I may have," she said finally. "I thought you had your own plan." I had told her my plan on Monday, I said. I said I would be there at 6. That was my plan. Another silence. What she said next. "I want to be careful here because I want to be accurate and fair." She didn't apologize. Not fully. Not directly. What she said was, "I should have made sure you were accounted for." It is the closest thing to an admission I have ever heard from my mother in 29 years. It is not what I would have written for her if I were writing the script. But it was real. And real, in my experience, is worth more than scripted. I said, "Thank you for saying that." Then I said, "I'm going to authorize the transfer of the settlement funds to the house repair account. Cecile will handle the paperwork this week. The contractors can proceed." She made a sound I cannot describe precisely. Relief and something else. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding what had almost happened. "Nora," she said, "we don't deserve you." I thought about that. "You're right that you don't," I said. "And I need you to remember that. Not to feel guilty about it. Just to remember it." The settlement was transferred. The house repairs were completed by February. My father reopened the hardware store on Clement Street in March, 6 months after the storm, with a small ceremony that the local paper covered. I attended. I stood in the back and shook his hand, and he held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. Things changed after the dinner at Maison Rouge. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way that stories sometimes resolve. Not a tearful reconciliation with everyone suddenly transformed. More slowly than that. More honestly than that. Caleb called me the week after the dinner, unprompted. He asked if I wanted to get coffee. We sat in a diner on the edge of town for 2 hours, and he told me that he had known something was wrong in the driveway that morning, that the gas station explanation had not fully sat right with him, that he had looked back on it many times. "I didn't fight hard enough to make sure you were okay," he said. "I was 23 and scared, and I let it go. I shouldn't have." That's the most honest thing anyone in my family has ever said to me. Not because of what it admitted, because of the fact that he said it, without being cornered first. Priya and I have spoken more in the months since the dinner than we had in the previous 5 years. She is not a bad person. She had been shaped by the same family dynamic that had shaped all of us. The one where I handled things, and she was protected from things, and neither of us had ever clearly named what that meant. Daniel has said nothing directly. We exist in a civil distance that is probably permanent. Some things are too embedded in who a person is to come unstuck from the outside. I have made peace with that. My mother and I speak every week now. Not warmly in the way some mothers and daughters are warm. More honestly. Something passed between us in that restaurant that made pretending harder than it used to be. My father called me on my birthday in November, just to say happy birthday. No other agenda. He had never done that before in my memory. Just called. Just said, "Happy birthday, Nora. I hope this is a good year for you." I almost didn't know what to do with that. I said, "Thank you, Dad. I think it will be." I am telling you this story in February, about 5 months after the dinner. I am back in Millhaven. My rental house was repaired. I moved back in 2 months ago. The town is mostly restored. Still some scars, some empty lots, some buildings that won't come back. Millhaven has been through things before. It keeps going. I have been through things before too. I keep going. Here is what I understand now that I didn't fully understand before the storm. Families do not abandon their members in emergencies without having already, in smaller ways, been doing it for years. The driveway at 5:45 in the morning was not an anomaly. It was a consequence. It was the visible, undeniable surface of something that had been happening beneath the surface of normal family life for a long time. I had been useful and reliable and available, and those qualities had been treated as natural resources rather than choices. Something that was simply there, like water from a tap. You don't think about where it comes from until it stops. I had never let it stop before. The insurance policy was an accident. I want to be clear about that. I did not renew that policy knowing it would matter someday. I renewed it because it needed to be renewed, and I was the one handling it. What happened with it was not a plan I made. It was a consequence my family created through 2 years of never once checking something that affected them significantly. That's the version of this story that I think matters most. Not that I had leverage, but that they never thought to look. That they assumed, without verifying, that everything was in order. That someone had taken care of it. That Nora had taken care of it. They were right. I had taken care of it. They just hadn't understood what that meant until it mattered. The house is theirs. It has always been theirs. I was never going to keep that money. But I needed something that the money could give me that had nothing to do with dollars. I needed a room full of my family to sit with the truth of what they had done. Without a way to buy their way out of it. Without a way to explain it away or redirect the conversation. I needed them to know that I knew. And to know that I could have chosen differently and didn't. That's not revenge. I've thought about what to call it, and revenge isn't the right word. The right word is visibility. For 29 years, I had been present in this family in every practical way and invisible in every emotional one. For about 2 hours on a Saturday night in Millhaven, I was completely visible, and they had to look directly at me. That's enough. It turns out that for me, that was enough. If you're listening to this and you know what it is to be the reliable one, the one who handles things, the one who stays, I want you to hear something. Being reliable is not the same as being without limits. Being the one who stays is not the same as being the one who has no needs. Being useful to the people you love is only sustainable if the people you love occasionally ask how you are and mean it. You are allowed to let them see that. You are allowed to let the consequences of how they've treated you become visible. Not to destroy them, just to stand in the room and be fully, undeniably real. That's what I did, and I am still standing. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been the one left behind in ways small or large, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd be glad to have you here for the next story.